now with some more on the wider effects of the Orlando shooting. We're joined by Michael Jeter. He's a lecturer at the University of Western Australia who focuses on terrorism and conflict. Mr. Jeter, good to speak to you this afternoon on TRT World. So your research has looked at media coverage of these kind of attacks and the increased likelihood of these attacks thanks to the media coverage. Just talk us through what you found.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. What I found so far, and this is still ongoing research, but it seems to be the case that the more we dedicate news coverage, the more attention we give to terrorist attacks, the more attacks we see in the future, and that is probably likely the case because terrorism precisely is very different to civil conflicts, to civil warfare, to any other sorts of warfare, in the sense that terrorists need the media to disseminate their message, to create fear in a society. And that seems to be working for many terrorist organizations at the moment. So what my research is showing up to now, what our research is showing up to now, is that we need to be very careful in understanding how we should cover terrorism and if we should cover it to the degree that we do cover it now, because it might play right in the hands of the terrorist organizations.
Absolutely. Well, just on that point, Mr. Jeter, James Comey, the director of the FBI, yesterday refused to use this man's name, the man who was involved in the shooting in Orlando, for exactly this reason. I mean, but what do you expect news organizations to do? 24-hour news needs 24-hour coverage.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
What do you expect news organizations to do? How would you like to see news organizations covering these kind of attacks?
I think, first of all, we need to be very careful with language. And I've noticed, especially in Europe, in the US and Australia as well, we refer to shooters that pledge allegiance to the Islamic State, and they use the term Islamic State, whereas you guys, for example, you're using the term Daesh. And I think that's already one fine distinction in the sense that Islamic State contains the word Islamic. And it makes it very easy for people to confuse this as something that is Muslim at its core, and I don't think that is the case. Is a very, very small group of extremist people, and they don't have anything to do with the general Muslim community. So we need to be very careful to not lead people to believe that this is Muslim against the Western world, for example. So first step would be to be very sensible in terms of what words do we use to describe this. And I think the first step would be to have a sensible discussion as to how do we make sure we're not playing right in the hands of these organizations and giving them the platform that they seek.
Absolutely. Well, that is an interesting distinction, Michael, because US parliamentarians and British parliamentarians use the term Daesh as we do, but yet news organizations in those countries use ISIS. So it's exactly that point you're playing into. How do you see this going forward? Because as I was saying, there are lots of 24-hour news stations that just roll on these kind of stories. Would you like to see them not cover them in such detail?
I think we need to be very careful by saying we shouldn't cover these things, because then we get awfully close to press freedom, and I don't think we need to touch that in this instance. I'm going to give you one example from a very different field, and that is when we talk about suicides, and you're part of the media, so as a journalist, you know that if you observe a suicide, unfortunate as it is, you're very careful in reporting that. And there are media guidelines that the industry has set up for themselves, in the sense that if we have to report on a suicide, we're going to be very careful in terms of what we say, in order not to encourage copycats and potential people who might then follow down the same path. So that goes, for example, we're not using the term suicide, but we're using the term incidents, right? So I think we should have an open discussion as to how we should cover terrorism. I don't think necessarily we should say we shouldn't cover it at all, but maybe we should take out terminology that plays right into the hands of these groups. And I think that could be an open discussion, and that could lead to something that might be some self-imposed guidelines by the media, and say, hey, if there's a terrorist attack happening, maybe be careful to not report in a way that is exactly playing into the hands of these groups.
Absolutely. Well, Michael Jeter there from the University of Western Australia. We have to leave it there, but really interesting debate. Thank you.